Charleston, West Virginia. In the embryonic hours of St. Patrick's Day in 1990, Charleston Urban Renewal Authority Assistant Director Lynn Priestley had been out for dinner and drinks with friends on a typical Friday evening. Sometime just after midnight, Priestley left the Tidewater Grill in the Charleston Town Center and started walking south towards the Judicial Annex parking lot where her car was located. At approximately 12:30 a.m., a security guard at the annex heard raised voices. His vision impaired by broken glasses, a bailiff from the annex comes to his assistance. At the same time, a female, believed to have been Priestley, is observed walking east on Courier Street. This was the last time Lynn Priestley was seen alive, and the events leading up to her grisly murder have remained unresolved for nearly 29 years.
The body of Lynn Priestley was found along the southern banks of the C.U.R.A River on March 21, 1990. 5 days later, and some 10 miles away, near the small community of Chesapeake. As far as authorities can surmise, she had not been seen or heard from since the early morning hours of the previous Saturday. The discovery of her body in a state of complete undress marked the end of a 5-day period of uncertainty for Priestley's friends and family, and the beginning of an intensive murder investigation that seemed to test the patience of investigators from the very outset. Despite yeoman work by the Charleston Police Department, including an open appeal to the public for help, authorities were unable to identify Priestley's killer. Nearly 29 years later, the case remains as fresh and frustrating as it was in 1990. As with so many unsolved homicides, the case has become personal to many investigators, all of whom have doggedly sought to answer two simple yet elusive questions. Who killed Lynn Priestley, and why?
Somehow, 1990 seems simultaneously like a lifetime ago and only yesterday. Though no one knew it at the time, the first year of the last decade of the 20th century promised to be an eventful one for West Virginia, the country, and the rest of the world. Labor unrest, an economic recession, the looming specter of war, and the continuing evaporation of the last vestiges of the communist bloc would keep many an eye glued to television sets for hours and days at a time. Speaking of television, in Charleston, Channel 8 were the people you could count on. Channel 13 was the best on the beat. And Channel 3 had recently labeled themselves the First Team. Tom McGee, Bob Brunner, and Doug Shields were almost daily guests in many homes. March of 1990 found Charleston and the rest of the state of West Virginia eager for a return to normalcy as an 11-day statewide teacher strike was finally coming to an end. Lynn Priestley was a lifelong resident of Charleston. Prior to accepting her job as assistant director of the Charleston Urban Renewal Authority, she had worked in the Charleston mayor's office, much as her mother had done some years earlier. At the time of her disappearance, Priestley lived alone in this apartment on Somerset Drive. She was widely regarded by those who knew her as a friendly, outgoing type who enjoyed both her work and spending time with friends. Friday, March 16, 1990. Priestley apparently made plans to meet with friends and her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Thomas White, at Bennigan's restaurant in the Charleston Town Center, located just 1 block north of her office at the Judicial Annex. Priestley met her friends at Bennigan's, where they had some drinks and reportedly made plans to meet later at Spanky's bar on the Canal Boulevard. Priestley and White soon left and made their way to the Tidewater Grill, located on the Court Street end of the town center. Priestley had worked part-time at the Tidewater Grill between 1985 and 1988 and remained friends with many of the employees. At least one Tidewater employee recalled that Priestley and White arrived at approximately 11 p.m. and went to the restaurant's lounge, where Priestley made conversation with some other friends of hers who happened to be present. Reports as to just what took place inside the Tidewater are varied, but most agree that Priestley and White apparently had a very vocal disagreement over something. At some point, White reportedly left the Tidewater for about 15 minutes before returning. The Tidewater Grill is located here, along Court Street, at the eastern end of the Charleston Town Center Mall. The Judicial Annex, where Priestley parked her car, is located here, just one block due south of the Tidewater. The site is now occupied by a modern, multi-level parking garage. However, in 1990, the area around the annex was an open, ground-level parking lot. The exact time frame of events between 11 p.m. on March 16th and approximately 12:30 a.m. on March 17th remains somewhat unclear. A Tidewater employee who knew Priestley personally recalled that she left the restaurant around 11:15. However, other reports state that the time of her departure was later, perhaps closer to midnight. Whatever the time, for reasons that remain unknown, Priestley left her car keys on top of the bar in the Tidewater's lounge. That night, Priestley was attired in light blue Jordache jeans with zippers at the ankles, a light blue Jordache blouse or jacket, white tennis shoes, and was seen carrying a brown leather handbag. Priestley stood 5 feet 4 inches tall and had shoulder-length blonde hair. At around 12:30 a.m., Denzel Shamblin, a security guard at the Judicial Annex, was carrying some trash bags out of the rear of the building when he heard what he described as a verbal argument on the annex parking lot. Shamblin later opined that his glasses had broken earlier in his shift, and he was unable to positively identify either of the parties involved in the verbal altercation. Shamblin recalled hearing a male and a female voice. The female screamed out, and Shamblin then observed her run from the annex parking lot and east along Quarrier Street in front of the old West Virginia Federal Building. Kanawha County Deputy Mike Stiltner was just wrapping up his evening shift as a bailiff and went to confront the male who had been involved in the altercation. According to Shamblin, Stiltner spoke with the man but did not detain him. Stiltner later refused to publicly comment on the incident, stating that he had made a full report to the Charleston Police Department. No further details on what was said between Stiltner and the man he confronted have ever been made public. At least, not officially. According to her friends, Priestley never arrived at Spanky's bar. Lynn Priestley's car was parked here. Shamblin stated that he observed a female, believed to have been Priestley, running east along Quarrier Street in front of the West Virginia Federal Building, which is located here. In 1990, Spanky's bar was located here, 2 blocks east and 2 blocks south, along the Kanawha Boulevard and just east of Capitol Street. If it was Priestley who was observed running past the Federal Building in an easterly direction, she was following a course that would have easily led her to Spanky's bar. White later told authorities that he had not wanted to accompany Priestley to Spanky's and took a taxi back to his home. He reportedly told Lynn's mother, Blanche Priestley, that he last saw her daughter near the Court Street entrance to the Town Center Mall. It should be pointed out that while news accounts at the time listed Thomas White as Priestley's boyfriend, his exact role in her life at the time is less certain. At least one of Priestley's friends stated that she was, in fact, eager to break ties with White, and that he apparently wanted more from their relationship than she was ready to give. Priestley relayed these intentions by phone to one of her friends only 2 days prior to her disappearance. The following morning, White contacted Priestley's parents shortly before 10 a.m. and asked if either of them had seen or heard from her. They had not. Priestley's mother made several attempts to reach her by phone at her apartment, but there was no answer. According to Blanche Priestley, Lynn was very close to both herself and her father and made it a point to call virtually every day. As the Saturday wore on and no call was received, Charles and Blanche Priestley grew more and more uneasy. Around 6 p.m., Thomas White went back to the Tidewater Grill to see if any of the employees knew of Lynn's whereabouts. White stated that he was told no one had seen Lynn since the previous night. Lynn Priestley's car keys, which had been left on the bar, were given to White. Not long thereafter, Priestley's car was found in the Judicial Annex parking lot in the same place it had been the previous day. Charles Priestley and Thomas White went to Lynn's apartment. It, too, appeared to have been untouched since the previous day. Charles Priestley instinctively contacted the Charleston Police Department, who dispatched detectives to Lynn Priestley's apartment. However, as there was no obvious signs of foul play, little could be done beyond the filing of a standard missing persons report. 5 agonizing days passed. On the morning of Wednesday, March 21st, Charleston authorities were making plans to search for Priestley along the banks of the Kanawha River. Sadly, it soon became apparent that no such efforts would be necessary. Around 2:30 p.m. that day, and some 10 miles away, a fisherman traversing the southern bank of the Kanawha River near the community of Chesapeake spotted what he first believed to be an unclad mannequin lying face down a few feet from the water's edge. Unfortunately, what the fisherman found that day was no mannequin. It was, in fact, the body of Lynn Priestley in a state of complete undress. The fisherman made his way to the Chesapeake City Hall about a half a mile away. City Councilman Alston Wilson and Ed Leonard, an investigator for the Kanawha County Prosecutor's Office, responded to the scene. Leonard quickly surmised that the body had been at its present location for 4 to 5 days. A small amount of blood found near the body indicated that death had occurred not long before it came to its final resting place. Given the steepness of the embankment along the river's edge, Leonard also surmised that Priestley's body had likely been rolled down the embankment from West Virginia Route 61, which runs parallel to the river. Representatives from the Charleston and Marmet police departments, along with the press and a crowd of curious onlookers, also responded to the scene. As traffic slowed to a crawl along Route 61, authorities, rescue workers, and members of the medical examiner's office began the slow, arduous process of documenting the grisly scene and moving the remains up the steep embankment. A tentative identification was made, but the Charleston Police Department at first withheld Priestley's name until her family could be notified.
And notified authorities. We have recovered the body of a female. We do have an identification, but we're withholding that pending notification of next of kin.
White female, black female?
White female.
What was she clothed?
No.
Any bruises on the body?
Well, the medical examiner staff has been on the scene, made a preliminary investigation and observation.
Although the body was found only feet away from the river's edge, Ed Leonard stated that it did not appear to him that it had ever actually entered the water. Plaster molds were made of what appeared to be footprints in the earthen space between the roadway and the river. Not only was Lynn Priestley found in a state of complete undress, but none of her clothing nor any personal items were reportedly anywhere to be seen. Although authorities declined to comment on any signs of sexual assault, unconfirmed reports that have leaked out over the last 29 years have hinted that such an assault did take place. Although Priestley's body was completely unclothed, it was rumored that her underwear was found crumpled into a ball and lodged inside of her mouth. The Charleston Police Department has never officially confirmed or denied these reports. While remaining mute on the subject of sexual assault, the Charleston Police Department soon confirmed the cause of death. manual strangulation at the hands of a person or persons unknown. When they learned of Priestley's fate, many of her friends and former co-workers were shocked almost beyond words.
They were concerned about the emotions of the family. There was someone that they knew for the first time that they had been touched by something that they otherwise saw on TV, and it's different when it hits close to home.
Lynn Priestley's body was found here, along the southern bank of the Kanawha River, just below West Virginia Route 61, between the communities of Chesapeake and Sheelian. This location is just over 10 miles east and upriver from the last place Priestley was known to have been seen alive. Just how had Priestley gotten from here, near the center of downtown Charleston, to here, where her body was found? As Priestley's own vehicle had remained untouched in the Judicial Annex parking lot, she clearly had not traversed the distance on her own. Utilizing the streets of downtown Charleston, the combined I-64-77 highway, and a portion of West Virginia Route 61, the distance from point A to point B can be traversed in roughly 15 to 20 minutes when traffic is light. Priestley's remains were transported back to Charleston, where an autopsy was performed by Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Irvin Sofer. The day following the discovery of Priestley's body, the Charleston Police Department called a press conference to both announce their findings and to address the public at large.
Autopsy was done on the body this morning. Dr. Sofer, the medical examiner's office, reports to us that at this time he has determined that the manner of death is strangulation. It appears at this time that it was not a ligature strangling, and it appears to have been done by human hands.
At the press conference, authorities again stopped just short of stating whether or not a sexual assault had taken place, stating that the issue was, at present, quote, too sensitive, end quote. Charleston police detectives Jack Bishop, Dallas Staples, and Jerry Rife made an appeal to the listening and viewing public for help with their investigation. They stated that they were particularly interested in speaking with anyone who may have seen Priestley after she was observed in front of the Federal Building at approximately 12:30 a.m. Bishop and Rife also announced that a 24-hour 1-800 number had been established so that any potential witnesses or persons with potential information could relate what they knew in an anonymous manner. Over the following weekend, the 800 number reportedly received in excess of 30 calls. The Charleston Police Department later stated that one female caller in particular had supplied information described as being, quote, helpful to the case. This anonymous tipster called the hotline on Thursday, March 22nd. Utilizing local media, authorities made a public appeal for the unknown female to again make contact. By this point, nearly all of the 13 detectives in the Charleston Police Department were working on the case in some capacity. Although Sergeant Dallas Staples sounded a publicly optimistic tone, very little in the way of new or useful information trickled in. Like so many other unsolved crimes, the investigation into Priestley's murder slowly began to chill. 1 year later, despite heavy public and political pressure for a resolution, the Charleston Gazette seemed to make it official that the case had gone cold. The same year, Sergeant Dallas Staples was appointed by Mayor Kent Hall as Charleston, West Virginia's first African-American chief of police. He remained in public service of one kind or another until his retirement in 2014. As the investigative wheels continued to spin in the sands of uncertainty, the same frustrating questions kept coming up. Why had Priestley left her keys on the bar at the Tidewater Grill? Was it a conscious act owing to fear of intoxication? Or had her keys been taken from her to prevent her from leaving the area in her own vehicle? It has never been publicly confirmed whether or not Priestley exhibited any signs of intoxication prior to leaving the Tidewater. If Priestley and White were arguing on the night she disappeared, what was the nature of the disagreement, and could it have had something to do with her later disappearance? What transpired near the Judicial Annex parking lot that night that caught the attention of Denzel Shamblin and Deputy Stiltner? Did the argument between Priestley and White continue down Court Street? Or did Priestley encounter someone else with whom she had heated words? Just what happened to Priestley between the Federal Building and Spanky's bar, her presumed destination? Did she perhaps reach Spanky's bar and then encounter some kind of trouble? Or did trouble strike somewhere else along the way? And lastly, how is it that Priestley's remains came to be found nearly 10 miles east of the place she was last seen alive when her car was found untouched in the Judicial Annex parking lot where she had left it the night she disappeared? Priestley's parents continued to hold on to hope until their deaths in 2005 and 2007, respectively. Funeral services for Lynn Priestley were held on Saturday, March 24, 1990, at the Village Chapel Presbyterian Church in Kanawha City. The Reverend W.F. Mansell presided. Lynn Priestley was laid to rest in a mausoleum at the Woodmere Cemetery in Huntington the same day. In 2015, on the 25th anniversary of Priestley's murder, then Charleston Chief of Police Steve Cooper again sounded an optimistic tone when he announced that the case had been revisited within the previous few years. Equating the ongoing investigation to a jigsaw puzzle, Chief Cooper made it quite clear that he felt only one or two pieces remained out of place. Sadly, as of 2019, the puzzle still remains incomplete.
Although the Charleston Police Department stated in 1990 that they had a suspect or suspects in mind, no names were ever made public. For a time, suspicion naturally fell upon Priestley's boyfriend, Thomas White, yet no indictment was ever brought or even sought against White, leading many to conclude that he has been ruled out as a suspect. White himself has made no public statement since 1990. The memory of Lynn Priestley seems to have faded little with the passage of time. Today, the mere mention of her name and murder seems to stir almost as much passion and sadness as it did nearly 29 years ago. This passion apparently extends well beyond the public and into the Charleston Police Department, where hope seems far from either cold or dead. To this day, both active and retired officers genuinely believe that this is a case which can still be solved, and that justice, however cold, remains waiting to be served.
Lynn Priestley was last seen alive at approximately 12:30 a.m. on Saturday, March 17, 1990. Approximately 90 minutes prior to this, Priestley had been seen by several friends and acquaintances at the Tidewater Grill in the Charleston Town Center between the hours of 11 p.m. and midnight. Priestley's friend, Thomas White, was also seen with her at the grill. However, the exact time that each of them left is unclear. For reasons that remain unknown, Priestley left her car keys on top of the bar at the Tidewater's lounge. Around 12:30 a.m., a security guard at the Kanawha County Judicial Annex observed Priestley heading east on Quarrier Street, following what sounded like a heated argument near the Annex parking lot. Kanawha County Deputy Mike Stiltner, a bailiff, confronted the man with whom Priestley was arguing, but did not detain him. Priestley's friends later recalled that she had promised to meet them at Spanky's bar, now Vino's Bar and Grill, on the Kanawha Boulevard after she left the Tidewater. By all accounts, Priestley never arrived. The following day, her car was found in the Judicial Annex parking lot where she had left it the night before. 5 days later, Priestley's remains were discovered along the southern bank of the Kanawha River, just west of the community of Shelian. Authorities estimated that the remains had been at the location since around the time Priestley disappeared. It was determined that the body had likely been rolled down the steep embankment from West Virginia Route 61, which runs parallel to the river. At the time it was discovered, Priestley's body was in a state of complete undress. Authorities have never stated if any articles of clothing or personal effects were found on or near the body. On the night she disappeared, Priestley was attired in a light blue Jordache blouse as well as blue Jordache jeans with a zipper at the ankles. She also had on white tennis shoes and was carrying a brown leather handbag. To date, neither the purse nor any of Priestley's clothing have ever been located. If you have any information concerning the murder of Lynn Priestley, please contact the Charleston, West Virginia Police Department.